You watch as less qualified colleagues navigate effortlessly into positions of influence while your merit goes unrecognized. Every day you witness people with inferior skills wielding power over decisions that affect your career, your projects, and your future, while you remain trapped in a system that seems designed to keep true talent invisible. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, and I spent my life studying power, not as philosophers imagine it should work, but as it actually operates in the real world of ambition, politics, and human nature. What I discovered about the true mechanics of power will transform how you understand every relationship, every workplace dynamic, and every opportunity for advancement in your life. The principles I'll share aren't about manipulation, they're about reality, and understanding these truths will finally give you the tools to claim the influence and recognition you deserve. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom about power and strategy, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art that shapes all human affairs. Let me take you back to Florence in 1498, when I was a young man who believed that merit and virtue would naturally lead to success. I had just secured a position as second chancellor of the Florentine Republic, and I thought the world made sense. I believed that good work would be rewarded, that competence would be recognized, and that justice would prevail in human affairs. How naive I was. The Florence of my youth was a city of impossible beauty and impossible politics. Every morning, I would walk through streets lined with marble statues and Renaissance masterpieces, past palaces that housed some of the most brilliant minds in Europe. Yet beneath this veneer of civilization, I witnessed a daily theater of ambition, manipulation, and raw power that would shatter every idealistic notion I held about how the world actually worked. My awakening began slowly, then hit me like a lightning bolt. I watched as talented administrators were dismissed not for incompetence, but for lacking the right family connections. I saw brilliant policies rejected not on their merits, but because they threatened certain interests. I observed how a well-timed gift or favor could accomplish more than months of diligent work. The republic I served claimed to value virtue and wisdom, yet power consistently flowed to those who understood its true mechanisms, rather than those who deserved it most. The real shock came in 1512 when the Medici family returned to Florence and everything I had built crumbled overnight. Despite years of faithful service, despite my competence and dedication, I was not only dismissed, but imprisoned and tortured on suspicion of conspiracy. In that dark cell, stripped of position and dignity, I finally understood the brutal truth that would reshape my entire worldview. Power is not distributed by merit, morality, or justice. Power goes to those who understand how to acquire it, maintain it, and use it effectively. This was my moment of awakening, the shattering of every comfortable illusion about how human affairs actually operate. I realized that while I had been playing by rules of virtue and merit, others had been playing an entirely different game, with entirely different rules. They understood that appearances matter more than reality, that timing trumps preparation, that relationships determine outcomes more than competence. While I focused on doing good work, they focused on ensuring their good work was seen by the right people at the right time. The fallen republic's seal, which once represented my authority and purpose, now became a symbol of how quickly power can vanish when you don't understand its true nature. That seal taught me that all political arrangements are temporary, all positions are conditional, and all power is fragile unless you understand the forces that create and destroy it. From my cell, I began to see Florence, and indeed all human organizations, with new eyes. I understood that every workplace, every institution, every group of people operates according to these same hidden dynamics. The church, the military, the merchant guilds, the noble families, all were engaged in the same fundamental struggle for influence and advantage. Those who succeeded weren't necessarily the most virtuous or capable. They were those who best understood the game being played. This revelation would guide everything I wrote afterward, including The Prince. But more importantly, it gave me the tools to see through the illusions that keep most people powerless. I learned to observe not what people said, but what they did. Not what institutions claimed to value, but what they actually rewarded. Not what leaders preached, but how they actually made decisions. My Renaissance awakening was painful but liberating. It freed me from the naive belief that the world should work according to moral principles and allowed me to see how it actually works according to the principles of power. This knowledge, hard-won through personal suffering and careful observation, is what I want to share with you today. Because until you understand these realities, you'll remain trapped in the same illusions that once trapped me. The most important lesson about power I ever learned came from watching the Medici family operate in Florence. While others focused on bloodlines, military might, or official titles, the Medicis understood something far more powerful: the art of patronage and the invisible networks that truly govern human affairs. I remember the first time I truly grasped their genius. Lorenzo de' Medici wasn't officially the ruler of Florence. We still had our republican institutions, our elected councils, our constitutional procedures. Yet when Lorenzo spoke, the city listened. When he suggested a course of action, it happened. When he opposed something, it died quietly. He wielded more real power as an unofficial patron than most kings possessed with all their armies and crowns. How did he do it? Through what I came to understand as the golden ring of influence, a system of mutual obligation and strategic generosity that created unbreakable bonds of loyalty. Lorenzo would identify talented artists, promising politicians, ambitious merchants, and brilliant scholars. Then he would do something remarkable. He would invest in their success before they had proven themselves valuable to him. He would commission artworks from unknown painters, fund the education of promising young men, provide loans to struggling businesses, and to create opportunities for people to showcase their talents. But here's the crucial part. He did this not randomly, but strategically, building a network of people who owed their advancement to his patronage. When these individuals succeeded, they remembered who had believed in them when no one else would. Watch this system create a web of influence that was far more powerful than any formal authority. A banker who had received early backing would ensure favorable lending terms for Medici projects. An artist whose career had been launched by Lorenzo's patronage would create works that enhanced the family's reputation. A politician whose rise had been supported would advocate for Medici interests in council meetings. A scholar whose research had been funded would produce writings that supported Medici policies. This wasn't corruption in the crude sense. It was something far more sophisticated. These weren't bought men. They were genuinely grateful allies who had been given the chance to excel. Their loyalty came not from fear or bribery, but from authentic appreciation and mutual benefit. The genius was that helping others succeed had created the very network that ensured Medici success. I began to see this pattern everywhere once I understood it. In every organization, in every field of human endeavor, there are formal power structures and informal influence networks. The formal structures are obvious: titles, hierarchies, official procedures. The informal networks are invisible, but often more decisive. Who knows whom, who owes whom, who trusts whom, who has helped whom advance. Most people focus entirely on the formal structures. They work hard to earn promotions, to gain official recognition, to climb the visible ladder of success. But while they're focused on these obvious metrics, others are building the invisible networks that ultimately determine how those formal structures actually operate. In my diplomatic missions, I encountered this reality repeatedly. I would meet with kings and princes who possessed absolute authority on paper, but struggled to implement their will because they had failed to build the networks of support that make authority effective. Meanwhile, I met advisors, courtiers, and even merchants who, despite holding no official titles, could shape royal decisions through their strategic relationships and careful cultivation of influence. The modern workplace operates on identical principles. You can be the most competent person in your department, but if you haven't built relationships with key decision-makers, if you haven't helped others advance their goals, if you haven't positioned yourself within the informal networks that really drive organizational decisions, your competence alone will rarely lead to the recognition and advancement you deserve. The Golden Ring Principle means understanding that investing in others' success is the most reliable way to build your own power. Beza, when you help a colleague complete a challenging project, when you connect someone with an opportunity, when you share credit generously, when you make others look good in front of their superiors, you're not just being nice, you're building political capital that will serve you throughout your career. But here's what the Medicis understood that most people miss. This must be done strategically and authentically. Random acts of kindness, while admirable, don't create the focused network of mutual obligation that translates into real influence. You must identify the people whose success would enhance your own position, whose gratitude would be valuable, whose future advancement would benefit your goals. The Medici lesson is that true power comes not from commanding others, but from making others successful in ways that align with your interests. When your success becomes intertwined with their success, when your advancement serves their goals as much as theirs serves yours, you've created something far more durable than authority, based on position or fear. You've created authority based on mutual benefit and genuine relationship, the most powerful foundation of all. In 1502, I encountered a man who would forever change my understanding of leadership and power, Cesare Borgia, the Duke of Valentinois. History remembers him as ruthless, and he was. But what most miss is that Cesare understood something about effective leadership that even good-hearted people in positions of authority refuse to accept. Sometimes the appearance of strength prevents the need for actual violence, and sometimes decisive action saves more lives than endless deliberation. When I first met Cesare, I was serving as Florence's envoy to his court. I expected to find a brutal tyrant ruling through fear alone. Instead, I discovered a leader who had mastered the most difficult balance in all of human relations, projecting strength while maintaining loyalty, inspiring respect while remaining approachable, demonstrating capability while avoiding the appearance of threat to those he needed as allies. Cesare's dagger became a symbol for me of this essential leadership paradox. A leader must possess the capacity for decisive, even harsh action, but the wisdom to rarely use it. The dagger's power came not from being drawn, but from everyone knowing it could be drawn, if necessary. This is the prince's dilemma: how to maintain the strength that prevents challenges while preserving the relationships that enable success. I watched Cesare handle a situation that perfectly illustrated this principle. Several of his subordinate commanders had begun plotting against him, believing they could challenge his authority with impunity. Rather than immediately moving against them, Cesare invited them to a meeting at Senigallia. He welcomed them warmly, treated them as honored guests, and then at the precise moment when they felt most secure in their treachery, he had them arrested and executed. The brutality of this action shocked me initially, but as I reflected on it, I began to understand its strategic genius. By acting decisively against clear betrayal, Cesare sent an unmistakable message to everyone in his organization. Loyalty would be rewarded, but treachery would be punished swiftly and completely. The fear this inspired wasn't random terror. It was precise, targeted deterrence that actually made future violence less necessary. More importantly, I observed how Cesare's decisive action against genuine threats enhanced his ability to show mercy and build loyalty with those who remained faithful. Because everyone knew he could and would act when necessary, His gestures of trust and generosity carried more weight. When someone secure in their power shows kindness, it might be weakness. When someone proven capable of harsh action chooses kindness instead, it becomes a gift that inspires genuine loyalty. This taught me that effective leadership requires what I came to call the dual nature, the capacity for both the lion and the fox, both strength and cunning, both decisive action and patient relationship building. Most people in leadership positions lean too heavily toward one side or the other. They're either too harsh, creating resentment and resistance, or too soft, inviting challenges and exploitation. In modern workplaces, I see this same dynamic constantly. Managers who never demonstrate their willingness to make difficult decisions, to terminate underperformers, to reject inadequate work, to hold people accountable for their commitments, find themselves managing teams that don't respect their authority. Their attempts at collaboration and consensus building are seen as weakness rather than wisdom. Conversely, leaders who rely primarily on position power and threats create organizations filled with fear and minimal initiative. People do exactly what they're told and nothing more, because creativity and independent thinking become dangerous when the leadership style is purely authoritarian. The most effective leaders I've observed understand Cesare's lesson. They establish their capacity for decisive action early and clearly, then use that established credibility to build genuine relationships and inspire voluntary cooperation. They demonstrate that they can make the hard decisions, then spend most of their time making sure such decisions aren't necessary. In your own career, this translates into several practical principles. First, you must establish your competence and reliability so thoroughly that people know you can deliver on your commitments and handle difficult challenges. This isn't about being aggressive, it's about being unmistakably capable. When people know you can perform under pressure, your suggestions carry more weight, and your leadership is more readily accepted. Second, you must be willing to confront problems directly rather than hoping they'll resolve themselves. Whether it's addressing a colleague's consistently poor performance, pushing back against unreasonable demands, or standing up for your team when they're being treated unfairly, your willingness to engage in difficult conversations establishes your credibility as someone who can handle challenging situations. But third, and perhaps most importantly, you must use this established strength to create an environment where such confrontations become rare. When people know you'll address problems directly, they're more likely to avoid creating those problems in the first place. When they know you'll stand up for principles that matter, they're more likely to respect those principles voluntarily. Cesare's dagger taught me that the highest form of strength is strength that rarely needs to be displayed because its existence is never in doubt. The most effective leaders are those who combine the lion's courage with the fox's wisdom, who can act decisively when necessary, but prefer to create conditions where such action becomes unnecessary. This is the prince's dilemma solved, not choosing between strength and kindness, but mastering both so completely that each enhances the other's effectiveness. One of the most painful lessons I learned came from watching brilliant, capable people fail not because they lacked skill or virtue, but because they couldn't read the changing winds of circumstance. I call this understanding fortune's wheel, the recognition that timing and opportunity shape destinies more powerfully than preparation alone, though preparation remains essential for seizing opportunities when they arise. I learned this lesson most vividly during my diplomatic missions throughout Italy. I met rulers who had built their power during times of stability, using methods perfectly suited to peaceful conditions. They governed through consensus, built their authority on tradition, and succeeded through patience and careful deliberation. These were admirable qualities that served them well, until circumstances changed. When war came, when alliances shifted, when new technologies emerged, when economic conditions transformed, many of these same leaders found themselves completely unprepared for the new reality. Their strengths became weaknesses. Their careful deliberation became fatal hesitation. Their respect for tradition became dangerous inflexibility. The very qualities that had made them successful in one era made them vulnerable in another. The broken hourglass became my symbol for this insight. Time doesn't flow predictably, and those who succeed are those who understand that different moments require different approaches. Most people try to use the same strategies in all circumstances, believing that what worked before will work again. But fortune's wheel is constantly turning, and each revolution brings new challenges that demand new responses. I witnessed this during the French invasions of Italy. Leaders who had spent decades mastering the art of Italian city-state diplomacy suddenly found themselves dealing with massive foreign armies operating under completely different rules. Some adapted quickly, abandoning old allegiances and forming new ones based on the changed reality. Others clung to traditional approaches and were swept away. But here's the crucial insight. Fortune isn't completely random. There are patterns to how circumstances change, signals that indicate when transformation is coming, and ways to position yourself to benefit from change rather than become its victim. The key is developing what I call environmental awareness, the ability to read the subtle shifts that precede major transformations. In my experience, successful people share one critical characteristic. They're constantly scanning their environment for signs of change. They notice when new technologies start affecting their industry. They pay attention to shifts in organizational priorities. They observe changes in the background and preparation of people being promoted. They listen to what leaders emphasize. In their communications, they track which projects receive resources and which are quietly abandoned. Most importantly, they understand that change creates both threats and opportunities, often simultaneously. When traditional approaches stop working, there's space for new approaches to succeed. When established players struggle to adapt, newcomers who understand the new reality can advance rapidly. When old rules become obsolete, those who quickly grasp the new rules gain enormous advantages. This is why I always counsel people to maintain what I call strategic flexibility. Have a clear sense of your core objectives, but remain adaptable about the methods you use to achieve them. Build multiple sources of value so that if one becomes less important, others can carry you forward. Develop relationships across different areas so that if your current position becomes vulnerable, you have other options. The timing aspect of Fortune's wheel is equally crucial. Even the right actions can fail if implemented at the wrong time. I've seen brilliant strategies collapse because they were executed too early, before the organization was ready to embrace them. I've seen equally brilliant strategies fail because they came too late after the moment for that approach had passed. Learning to read timing requires understanding that every organization, every industry, every situation has its own rhythms and cycles. There are moments when bold action is rewarded and moments when patience is wisdom. There are periods when innovation is welcome and periods when stability is valued. There are times when individual achievement is celebrated and times when collaboration is prioritized. The most successful people I've observed don't just wait for the right moment, they help create it. They build support for their ideas gradually. They position their suggestions to align with emerging organizational needs. They time their proposals to coincide with budget cycles or strategic planning processes. They understand that even the best ideas need the right context to succeed. But perhaps the most important lesson about Fortune's wheel is this. You cannot control all circumstances, but you can control your preparation for changing circumstances. When opportunity arrives, and it always does, it favors those who have built the skills, relationships, and resources needed to seize it quickly. This means investing in your capabilities, even when you don't immediately need them. It means building relationships outside your immediate area of responsibility. It means staying informed about trends and developments that might seem irrelevant to your current role, but could become crucial to your future success. Fortune's wheel will turn whether you're ready or not. The question is whether you'll be prepared to rise with it or be crushed beneath it. Those who understand this truth don't just react to change, they anticipate it, prepare for it, and position themselves to benefit from it. They know that in a world of constant transformation, adaptability isn't just an advantage, it's the foundation of all lasting success. The greatest revelation of my political life came when I realized that effective leadership requires mastering two completely different natures, the lion and the fox. Most people try to succeed using only one approach, either straightforward strength or clever maneuvering, but truly powerful individuals understand when each is appropriate and how to combine them seamlessly. I developed this insight through years of observing leaders who failed despite possessing remarkable qualities. I met princes who had the courage of lions but lacked strategic thinking, charging into every situation with noble directness, only to be outmaneuvered by more cunning opponents. I also encountered courtiers with the cleverness of foxes, but no backbone, brilliant at scheming but incapable of taking decisive action when circumstances demanded it. The dual mask became my symbol for this essential truth. Leadership requires the ability to present different faces at different times while maintaining a consistent core identity. This isn't about deception, it's about understanding that different situations call for different approaches, and the most effective leaders can adapt their style without losing their authenticity. The lion represents everything direct, honest, and powerful about leadership. When you operate as a lion, you state your position clearly, you stand behind your commitments, you protect those under your care, and you face challenges head-on. Lions build trust through consistency and reliability. People know where they stand with lions because lions say what they mean and do what they say. But the lion's approach has limitations. Pure directness can be exploited by those who understand that not everyone operates with the same honesty. Straightforward approaches can fail when dealing with complex political situations that require subtlety and patience. Lions can be predictable, and predictability can become a weakness when facing opponents who use that predictability against them. The fox represents the strategic, adaptive, intelligent side of leadership. When you operate as a fox, you understand that direct confrontation isn't always the best path to your objectives. You recognize that sometimes achieving your goals requires patience, misdirection, or working through others. Foxes excel at reading situations, identifying hidden motivations, and finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The fox's approach also has limitations. Too much cleverness can create distrust and damage relationships. Constantly maneuvering and calculating can prevent you from building the straightforward bonds that create genuine loyalty. Foxes can become so focused on strategy that they miss opportunities that require simple, direct action. The most effective leaders I've observed seamlessly combine both natures. They have the lion's courage to take stands on important principles, but the fox's wisdom to choose their battles carefully. They possess the lion's strength to make difficult decisions, but the fox's intelligence to ensure those decisions are implemented successfully. They display the lion's reliability in their core commitments, but the fox's adaptability in their methods. In practice, this means understanding that your approach should match your situation. When dealing with straightforward people who value directness, lead with your lion nature. State your position clearly, explain your reasoning honestly, and follow through on your commitments. When navigating complex political situations with multiple stakeholders and competing interests, engage your fox nature. Consider all angles, understand various motivations, and find paths that serve multiple purposes. The key insight is that both natures must be genuine expressions of who you are, not calculated performances. People can sense authenticity, and they can also sense when someone is merely playing a role. The most effective approach is to develop both your direct and strategic capabilities so thoroughly that you can draw on whichever is most appropriate without appearing to change your fundamental character. I've seen this principle work powerfully in modern organizational contexts. The most successful executives can deliver difficult feedback directly and compassionately, lion, while also building coalitions to support necessary but unpopular changes, fox. They can stand firmly behind their team when it's under attack, lion, while also positioning the team's work to align with organizational priorities, fox. They can make tough decisions quickly when speed is essential, lion, while also taking time to build consensus when buy-in is crucial, fox. This dual nature also applies to how you manage your reputation and relationships. With some colleagues, your value comes from being the person who always tells the truth, who can be counted on for honest assessments and reliable follow-through. With others, your value comes from being the person who understands how things really work, who can navigate complex situations and find solutions that others miss. The most powerful realization is that these two natures can enhance each other, rather than conflict. When people know you have the fox's intelligence, your lion-like directness carries more weight, because they understand it's a choice, not a limitation. When people know you have the lion's strength, your fox-like strategies are more trusted, because they know you're not maneuvering from weakness or fear. The lion and the fox together create something more powerful than either could achieve alone, leaders who can be trusted to handle any situation appropriately. People follow such leaders because they know that whatever challenges arise, their leader has the tools and wisdom to respond effectively. Whether the situation calls for direct confrontation or subtle strategy, for bold action or patient maneuvering, for inspiring speeches or quiet negotiations, they know their leader can deliver what the moment requires. This is the essence of adaptive leadership, not changing who you are to match circumstances, but expressing different aspects of your complete self as situations demand. Master both the lion and the fox, and you'll be prepared for any challenge that leadership requires. Perhaps no lesson has been more misunderstood throughout history than my observations about the difference between being and appearing. Critics have accused me of advocating duplicity and manipulation, but they miss the crucial point. In a world where perception shapes reality, managing how you appear isn't about deception. It's about ensuring that your true capabilities and intentions are accurately communicated to those who matter. Learned this lesson through countless painful observations of capable, well-intentioned people whose talents went unrecognized because they failed to understand how perception works in human organizations. I watched brilliant administrators lose positions to less competent rivals who better understood the theater of organizational life. I saw virtuous leaders replaced by those who appeared more decisive, even when their decisions were ultimately less sound. The theater curtain became my symbol for this insight. There is always a performance aspect to leadership and influence, not because leaders are actors playing false roles, but because human beings naturally judge others based on limited information and interpreted signals. Understanding this reality allows you to ensure that the signals you send accurately represent your actual capabilities and values. The art of appearing begins with recognizing that people form judgments quickly and change them slowly. In most professional interactions, others see only a small fraction of your work, your thinking, and your character. They make decisions about your competence, reliability, and potential based on these limited observations. This isn't shallow or unfair. It's inevitable given the complexity of modern organizations and the speed at which decisions must be made. This means that how you present your work can be as important as the quality of the work itself. I've observed many situations where excellent projects failed to receive recognition because they were presented poorly, while mediocre projects gained disproportionate attention because they were showcased effectively. The tragedy isn't that presentation matters, it's that many capable people refuse to develop this crucial skill. Strategic self-presentation means understanding your audience and tailoring your communication to what they value and understand. When presenting to financial leaders, emphasize metrics, cost effectiveness, and measurable outcomes. When presenting to creative teams, focus on innovation, artistic value, and inspiring vision. When presenting to operational managers, highlight efficiency, reliability, and practical implementation. This isn't dishonesty, it's translation, ensuring that your message is received in terms your audience can appreciate. The art of appearing also extends to how you manage your reputation over time. Reputations are built through consistent signals sent across multiple interactions and contexts. Each email you send, each meeting you attend, each project you complete contributes to the overall impression people form of your character and capabilities. Most people manage these interactions randomly, missing opportunities to build a coherent professional identity. Effective reputation management means being intentional about the image you project without being false about who you are. If you want to be seen as strategic, consistently contribute long-term thinking to discussions. If you want to be seen as reliable, always meet your commitments and communicate proactively about potential delays. If you want to be seen as collaborative, regularly share credit and seek others' input on important decisions. But here's the crucial insight that many miss. Appearing effectively requires actually being effective. Sustainable success comes from aligning your appearance with genuine capability. You can manage perceptions in the short term through clever presentation, but lasting influence requires delivering real results that support your projected image. I've seen many people try to build reputations they couldn't sustain, and the eventual exposure is more damaging than if they had simply been honest about their actual level of development. The most powerful approach is to identify your genuine strengths and then ensure those strengths are visible to the people who matter for your goals. This also means being strategic about visibility itself. Many capable people work diligently in isolation, assuming their results will speak for themselves. But in complex organizations, results often speak quietly, while other voices speak loudly. You must create opportunities for your work to be seen and your contributions to be recognized. This doesn't mean shameless self-promotion or taking credit for others' work. It means ensuring that when you solve problems, the right people know about it. When you develop innovative approaches, you share them in appropriate forums. When you achieve significant results, you present them in contexts where they can influence important decisions about your future opportunities. The art of appearing also involves understanding what not to display. Some aspects of your personality, your process, or your private opinions may be authentic, but counterproductive to share in professional contexts. This isn't about being fake, it's about being strategic about which authentic aspects of yourself you emphasize in different situations. Professional discretion means understanding that you can be genuinely yourself while still being selective about what you reveal and when. You can maintain your integrity while adapting your communication style to different audiences. You can be honest about your capabilities while presenting them in the most favorable light. The ultimate goal of mastering the art of appearing is to ensure that your external reputation accurately reflects your internal reality and supports your legitimate ambitions. When there's alignment between who you are, how you appear, and what you want to achieve, you create the kind of authentic presence that builds lasting influence. This is why I emphasize that the art of appearing isn't about manipulation, it's about communication. It's about ensuring that your true value is visible to those who can recognize and reward it. In a world where perception shapes opportunity, mastering this art isn't optional for those who want to make their mark. It's an essential skill for anyone who wants their real capabilities to translate into real influence and meaningful success. No aspect of power is more delicate or more crucial than understanding how to build alliances that serve your purposes while protecting yourself from the inevitable shifts in loyalty that occur in any human organization. I learned this through watching the intricate dance of Italian politics, where today's ally could become tomorrow's enemy based on changing circumstances rather than personal animosity. The two-faced coin became my symbol for this reality. Every alliance contains within it the seeds of its own transformation. This isn't cynicism. It's recognition that people's interests change, circumstances evolve, and what serves mutual benefit in one situation may create competing interests in another. Understanding this doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you realistic about human nature and better able to build relationships that can survive changing conditions. I witnessed this truth most clearly during the constantly shifting alliances between Florence, Milan, Naples, Venice, and the Papal States. Leaders who took personal offense at changing allegiances rarely lasted long, while those who understood that political relationships serve strategic purposes rather than emotional needs were able to adapt and thrive regardless of how partnerships evolved. The key insight is that effective alliances are built on mutual benefit rather than personal affection. When you base professional relationships on shared interests and complementary capabilities, they become more durable than relationships based solely on personal liking. People may change their feelings about you, but if working with you continues to serve their legitimate interests, the relationship can continue productively. This means being strategic about which alliances you prioritize and how you structure them. The most valuable alliances are those where your success genuinely contributes to others' success, creating incentives for continued cooperation. When you help someone achieve their goals, when your advancement serves their interests, when your skills complement their needs, you've created the foundation for a relationship that can weather normal fluctuations in organizational politics. But you must also be realistic about the temporary nature of all alliances. People's priorities change as they advance in their careers. Organizational restructuring can put former allies in competition with each other. New leadership can shift the strategic landscape in ways that make previous alliances less relevant or even counterproductive. This is why I counsel building broad networks rather than depending entirely on a few key relationships. Diversify your alliance portfolio the same way you would diversify any important investment. Maintain relationships across different departments, different levels of hierarchy, and different areas of expertise. This way, when some relationships become less advantageous due to changing circumstances, others can provide the support and opportunities you need. The most sophisticated practitioners of alliance building understand that you can maintain good relationships even when formal alliances shift. I observed leaders who could transition from being allies to being competitors without creating personal animosity, and who could return to being allies when circumstances changed again. They understood that professional relationships and strategic alignments are separate things that can change independently. This requires developing what I call emotional intelligence about power dynamics. You must be able to distinguish between personal attacks and strategic necessities. When someone opposes your initiative, they may be serving their own legitimate interests rather than expressing hostility toward you personally. When alliances shift, it often reflects changing organizational needs rather than betrayal in the personal sense. The ability to work productively with people whose interests sometimes conflict with yours is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. In all complex organizations, pure alignment is rare. More often, you'll find yourself working with people who share some interests with you while competing with you in other areas. The most successful people can compartmentalize these relationships, cooperating where interests align while competing, respectfully where they diverge. This also means being prepared for the reality that some people will betray genuine trust. Not everyone operates with the same ethical standards, and some individuals will take advantage of others' good faith efforts to build authentic relationships. Protecting yourself from such betrayals doesn't require becoming cynical. It requires being observant about how people actually behave over time. Watch how potential allies treat others in their network. Do they honor their commitments? Do they share credit appropriately? Do they maintain confidences? Do they handle conflicts directly and professionally? These behaviors are better predictors of how they'll treat you than any promises they might make. The most dangerous alliances are those based on shared negativity rather than shared positive goals. When relationships are built primarily around mutual complaints, opposition to common enemies, or criticism of current conditions, they often prove unstable because they lack the positive foundation needed for sustained cooperation. Instead, focus on building alliances around shared aspirations, complementary skills, and mutual opportunities for advancement. When your relationships are based on helping each other succeed rather than just surviving current challenges, they create value that extends beyond immediate circumstances. The ultimate lesson about alliances and betrayals is that both are normal, parts of organizational life rather than moral absolutes. People aren't inherently loyal or disloyal. They respond to incentives, circumstances, and opportunities. Understanding this allows you to build relationships that acknowledge this reality while still creating genuine value for everyone involved. When you approach alliances with realistic expectations, clear communication about mutual interests, and appropriate protections against changing circumstances, you can build networks that serve you throughout your career, regardless of how individual relationships evolve. This isn't about being calculating. It's about being professional in your approach to professional relationships, understanding that the strongest alliances are those built on solid foundations rather than wishful thinking. One of the most crucial lessons I learned during my political career was that popular opinion, while often dismissed by those in formal positions of power, actually determines the success or failure of most initiatives in any organization. The crowd's roar, whether supportive or hostile, can elevate leaders to extraordinary heights or destroy them regardless of their formal authority or elite backing. I discovered this truth through observing the fate of various rulers throughout Italy. Those who maintained the support of common citizens could survive even serious mistakes and external threats, while those who lost popular backing found their positions untenable despite having superior resources and formal legitimacy. The voice of the people, when properly understood and respectfully engaged, becomes one of the most powerful forces in any political system. This insight applies directly to modern workplace dynamics. In every organization, there's a distinction between the formal hierarchy and the informal networks of influence that actually determine how things get done. While executives make strategic decisions, frontline employees often determine whether those decisions are implemented effectively. While managers allocate resources, individual contributors decide how much discretionary effort to invest in various projects. Understanding popular sentiment means recognizing that every organization has its own culture, its own informal communication, networks, and its own collective wisdom about what works and what doesn't. Leaders who dismiss this collective intelligence as irrelevant or uninformed often find their initiatives failing, not because the ideas were bad, but because they failed. To build the grassroots support necessary for successful implementation. The most effective leaders I've observed spend significant time listening to perspectives from throughout the organization, not just from their immediate reports or formal advisors. They understand that people at different levels see different aspects of problems and opportunities. Frontline employees often have the clearest view of customer needs, operational challenges, and practical constraints that can make or break strategic initiatives, but engaging popular opinion effectively requires more than just listening. It requires understanding how to communicate in ways that resonate with different audiences and how to build genuine consensus around shared objectives. This means translating strategic vision into terms that make sense to people, focused on day-to-day operations, and showing how organizational success translates into personal benefits for individual contributors. I learned that popular support is built through consistency between words and actions over time. People judge leaders not primarily by their speeches or stated intentions, but by whether their decisions actually improve conditions for those they claim to serve. When there's alignment between what leaders say and what they do, when their success genuinely benefits others, they build the kind of popular support that makes even difficult changes possible. However, popular opinion can also be volatile and sometimes misguided. The same crowds that celebrate a leader's triumphs can turn against them quickly when circumstances change or when their expectations aren't met. This means that while popular support is essential, it must be built on solid foundations rather than temporary enthusiasm or superficial appeal. The key is distinguishing between populist pandering and genuine responsiveness to legitimate concerns. Pandering means telling people what they want to hear without regard for practical constraints or long-term consequences. Genuine responsiveness means understanding what people need to be successful in their roles and working to address those needs even when it requires difficult decisions or unpopular short-term measures. In workplace contexts, this translates into several practical approaches. First, make sure your initiatives actually solve problems that matter to the people who will be affected by them. Don't assume that what seems important at the strategic level will feel relevant to those responsible for implementation. Take time to understand their perspectives and concerns before finalizing your approach. Second, communicate the reasoning behind decisions in ways that help people understand how those decisions serve their interests as well as organizational interests. When people understand the logic and see the personal relevance, they're more likely to support implementation even when it requires additional effort or changes to familiar routines. Third, create mechanisms for ongoing feedback and adjustment. Popular support isn't built once and maintained automatically. It requires continuous attention to how initiatives are working in practice and willingness to make adjustments based on real-world experience. The most successful leaders treat implementation as an iterative process rather than a one-time event. Fourth, recognize and reward the contributions of people throughout the organization, not just those in formal leadership positions. When people feel that their efforts are seen and valued, when their successes are celebrated and their insights are incorporated into future planning, they become invested in continued success rather than passive compliance. The crowd's roar can be your greatest asset or your most dangerous threat, depending on how well you understand and engage with the genuine concerns and aspirations of the people whose support you need. This isn't about manipulation or false promises. It's about recognizing that sustainable success requires buy-in from everyone whose efforts contribute to achieving your objectives. When you build genuine popular support based on mutual benefit and demonstrated competence, you create a foundation for influence that extends far beyond what formal authority alone can provide. People who feel heard, respected, and genuinely served become advocates rather than obstacles, multiplying your effectiveness and creating momentum that makes even ambitious goals achievable. The voice of the people, properly understood and respectfully engaged, becomes one of your most powerful tools for creating lasting change and building sustainable influence throughout any organization. One of the most counterintuitive lessons I learned through observing political systems is that conflict, when properly managed, actually strengthens organizations and prevents much more destructive explosions of tension. Most people try to avoid conflict entirely, believing that harmony should be the goal of any well-functioning group. But I discovered that attempting to suppress all disagreement often leads to the accumulation of resentments and misunderstandings that eventually erupt in ways far more damaging than open, constructive conflict would have been. The balanced scales of discord became my symbol for this principle. Managed tension between competing interests actually creates stability by ensuring that no single faction becomes so dominant that it can ignore the legitimate concerns of others. When different perspectives are allowed to compete openly within appropriate boundaries, the resulting decisions are typically more robust and sustainable than those made in artificial harmony. I observed this dynamic most clearly in the Florentine Republic, where the formal processes for managing conflict between different interest groups, merchants, artisans, nobles, and common citizens, allowed the city to function effectively despite significant underlying tensions. When these processes worked well, competing factions could advocate for their positions vigorously while still cooperating on shared interests. When the processes broke down and conflicts were driven underground, the resulting instability was far more dangerous. This insight applies directly to modern organizational life. In healthy organizations, people disagree openly about strategies, priorities, and resource allocation. These disagreements, when handled professionally, lead to better decisions because they force examination of assumptions, consideration of alternatives, and development of solutions that address multiple perspectives. Organizations that suppress such disagreements often find themselves implementing poorly considered strategies because no one was willing or able to raise concerns during the planning process. The key distinction is between productive and destructive conflict. Productive conflict focuses on issues, ideas, and strategies rather than personalities. It's characterized by people advocating strongly for their positions while remaining open to persuasion and willing to support whatever decision is ultimately made. Destructive conflict becomes personal, emotional, and focused on winning rather than finding the best solution. As a leader, your role isn't to eliminate conflict but to channel it productively. This means creating environments where people feel safe expressing disagreement, establishing processes for working through different perspectives, and modeling how to argue forcefully for your position while remaining respectful of those who disagree. In practice, this requires several specific skills. First, you must be able to separate intellectual disagreement from personal attack. When someone challenges your ideas or proposals, they're not necessarily challenging your competence or value as a person. Learning to receive criticism without becoming defensive allows you to benefit from others' insights while maintaining your relationships with those who disagree with you. Second, you must develop the ability to argue persuasively without becoming aggressive. Present your reasoning clearly, acknowledge the strengths in opposing positions, and focus on finding solutions that address legitimate concerns from multiple perspectives. The goal isn't to dominate the discussion, but to ensure that your viewpoint is fully understood and properly considered. Third, you must learn when to escalate conflicts and when to let them resolve naturally. Some disagreements need immediate attention because they're blocking important decisions or creating broader organizational problems. Others are better left to work themselves out as people gain more experience with the issues involved. Developing judgment about which conflicts require intervention is crucial for effective leadership. The necessity of conflict also means understanding that your role may sometimes require you to be the source of productive tension. When you see problems that others are avoiding, when you notice that groupthink is preventing consideration of important alternatives, when you observe that artificial harmony is masking serious underlying issues, you may need to introduce the conflict that others are reluctant to acknowledge. This doesn't mean being contrarian for its own sake or creating unnecessary drama. It means being willing to raise difficult questions, challenge popular assumptions, and force consideration of uncomfortable realities when doing so serves legitimate organizational interests. Sometimes the most valuable contribution you can make is being the person willing to say what everyone is thinking, but no one wants to voice. I've observed that organizations with cultures that handle conflict well consistently outperform those that prioritize surface harmony. When people know they can disagree without damaging their relationships or careers, they're more likely to share crucial information, identify potential problems early, and contribute their best thinking to important decisions. Conversely, organizations that punish or discourage disagreement often find themselves blindsided by problems that were visible to many people but never discussed openly. The apparent harmony in such organizations is usually superficial, masking deeper tensions that eventually express themselves in more destructive ways. The balanced scales of discord remind us that the goal isn't perfect balance, it's dynamic. Stability that can adjust to changing circumstances while maintaining overall coherence. Some conflicts will tip the scales temporarily in one direction or another, but the system remains stable as long as the underlying processes for managing disagreement remain functional. Understanding the necessity of conflict transforms how you approach workplace relationships and organizational dynamics. Instead of viewing disagreement as a threat to be minimized, you see it as an essential ingredient in good decision-making. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations, you engage in them with skill and confidence. Instead of taking opposition personally, you use it as an opportunity to refine your thinking and build stronger solutions. This perspective allows you to become more influential because people learn to trust your judgment. When colleagues know that you'll engage with their concerns honestly rather than dismissing them, when they see that you can handle disagreement without becoming defensive or vindictive, when they observe that you're genuinely interested in finding the best solutions rather than just winning arguments, they become more willing to support your initiatives and more open to your leadership. The necessity of conflict, properly understood and skillfully managed, becomes one of your most powerful tools for building trust, making better decisions, and creating organizational cultures that can adapt and thrive in challenging circumstances. Throughout my career, I witnessed countless capable leaders destroy themselves by underestimating the profound difficulty of introducing new ways of doing things, even when those new approaches were obviously superior to existing methods. The bridge between worlds became my symbol for this challenge. Innovation requires not just good ideas, but the delicate art of connecting those ideas to existing systems and mindsets in ways that make change feel safe rather than threatening. Learned this lesson most painfully during my own attempts to reform military and administrative systems in Florence. My proposals were based on careful study of what worked in other cities and clear analysis of our current weaknesses. The logic was compelling, the benefits were obvious, and the need was urgent. Yet time after time, I watched perfectly reasonable reforms fail not because they were flawed, but because I had underestimated how deeply people resist changing familiar systems, even when those systems aren't working well. The fundamental challenge of innovation is that it asks people to abandon methods they understand and trust in favor of approaches that seem uncertain and risky. Even when current systems are clearly inadequate, they have the powerful advantage of familiarity. People know how to navigate them, they understand their limitations and workarounds, and they've built their competence and identity around mastering existing approaches. New systems, no matter how superior in theory, represent unknown territory. They require new skills, new relationships, and new ways of thinking. They make people's current expertise less valuable and their accumulated experience less relevant. It's perfectly rational for people to resist such changes, even when they intellectually agree that change is necessary. This means that successful innovation requires as much attention to the human and political aspects of change as to the technical aspects. You must understand not just what needs to be different, but how to help people make the psychological and practical transition from old ways to new ways. The bridge between worlds must be strong enough to support people as they cross from familiar territory to unexplored possibilities. The most effective innovators I've observed understand that change happens through people, not around them. They invest significant effort in helping others see not just the benefits of new approaches, but how those benefits connect to things people already value. They demonstrate how innovation serves existing goals rather than replacing them with entirely different objectives. This requires what I call respectful innovation, acknowledging the value and logic of current systems while showing how new approaches can build on that foundation rather than destroying it. When you frame change as evolution rather than revolution, when you highlight continuities rather than emphasizing disruptions, you make it easier for people to support your initiatives. Practical implementation means starting small and building credibility through demonstrated success. Rather than proposing comprehensive transformations that require people to bet everything on unproven approaches, begin with pilot projects that allow people to experience the benefits of innovation while maintaining the security of knowing they can return to familiar methods if necessary. The most successful innovations I've witnessed were those that initially required minimal disruption to existing systems while providing clear, immediate benefits to the people most affected by them. As people gained confidence with new approaches and began to see their advantages firsthand, they became advocates for broader implementation rather than obstacles to change. This also means being patient with the pace of adoption. Different people adapt to change at different rates, and trying to force faster adoption than people can psychologically handle often creates resistance that slows overall progress. Allow early adopters to become comfortable with new approaches, then use their enthusiasm and success stories to encourage others to follow. Understanding resistance is equally important. When people oppose your innovations, they're rarely being unreasonable or obstructionist. More often, they're expressing legitimate concerns about risks, uncertainties, or potential negative consequences that you may not have fully considered. Listening carefully to resistance often reveals important insights that can improve your approach and increase the likelihood of successful implementation. The bridge between worlds also requires acknowledging that not all innovation is appropriate for all contexts. Some organizations and situations are better served by incremental improvements to existing systems rather than fundamental transformations. The key is developing judgment about when innovation is genuinely needed versus when it's simply appealing. To you personally, sometimes the most valuable innovation is improving execution of current approaches rather than introducing entirely new approaches. Before proposing systemic changes, ensure that existing systems are being implemented as effectively as possible. Often what appears to be a need for innovation is actually a need for better execution of proven methods. When innovation is genuinely necessary, the most sustainable approach is building broad coalition of support before beginning implementation. Identify the stakeholders who will be most affected by changes, understand their concerns and motivations, and involve them in shaping how new approaches will be introduced and managed. This collaborative approach to innovation serves multiple purposes. It improves the quality of your solutions by incorporating diverse perspectives and practical insights. It builds buy-in by giving people ownership in the change process. And it creates a network of advocates who can help address concerns and resistance as implementation proceeds. The bridge between worlds reminds us that innovation isn't just about having better ideas. It's about creating pathways that allow people to move from where they are to where they need to be in ways that feel manageable and worthwhile. When you master this art, you become not just a generator of good ideas, but a catalyst for positive change that actually gets implemented and sustained. This capability transforms how organizations see you and dramatically increases your influence. Leaders who can introduce necessary changes while maintaining stability and morale become invaluable assets. They're the people who get asked to tackle the most challenging problems and given the resources to implement ambitious solutions because They've proven they can manage the human complexity that makes or breaks innovative initiatives. One of my most important insights came from studying why some organizations consistently outperform others, even when facing similar challenges and having access to comparable resources. The answer, I discovered, lies in the difference between mercenary mindsets and citizen mindsets, between people who do the minimum required for their compensation versus people who are genuinely invested in the organization's long-term success. The citizen sword became my symbol for this principle. When people feel genuine ownership in an organization's mission and believe their personal success is tied to collective success, they bring a level of commitment and initiative that no amount of external motivation can replicate. This insight transformed my understanding of organizational effectiveness and human motivation. I observed this dynamic most clearly in comparing mercenary armies to citizen militias. Mercenary soldiers, no matter how professional and well-trained, were fundamentally fighting for pay rather than principle. They would perform their contracted duties competently, but when situations became difficult or dangerous, when victory required extraordinary effort or personal sacrifice, they often fell short because they had no deeper investment in the outcome than their immediate compensation. Citizen soldiers, while often less technically skilled, brought something more powerful: personal stake in the results. They were fighting for their families, their communities, their way of life. This emotional investment translated into initiative, persistence, and creativity that professional mercenaries rarely matched. When plans failed, citizens improvised. When situations became desperate, they found reserves of effort that surprised even themselves. This same dynamic operates in every modern organization. You can hire capable people to perform specific functions, and they may execute those functions quite well. But building something extraordinary requires people who see their individual success as inseparable from organizational success, who take personal ownership of outcomes beyond their formal job descriptions, who bring their full creativity and energy to solving problems rather than just completing assigned tasks. The challenge is that you cannot simply demand this kind of commitment. It must be earned through creating conditions where such investment feels rational and worthwhile. People become citizens rather than mercenaries when they believe the organization's success will genuinely benefit them, when they feel their contributions are recognized and valued, and when they see opportunities for growth and advancement. Tied to collective achievement, this means moving beyond transactional relationships based purely on trading time and effort for compensation toward relationships based on shared investment in meaningful outcomes. The most effective organizations I've observed create environments where individual excellence serves both personal and collective interests, where helping the organization succeed is the most reliable path to individual success. Building this citizen mindset requires several key elements. First, people must understand how their individual contributions connect to larger organizational objectives. When people see the meaningful impact of their work, when they understand how their efforts contribute to outcomes they care about, they naturally invest more energy and creativity in their performance. Second, there must be genuine opportunities for advancement and growth tied to organizational success. When people see that the organization's prosperity creates opportunities for their own development, when they observe that excellent performance is recognized and rewarded, they have rational reasons to invest in collective success, rather than just meeting minimum requirements. Third, people must feel that their insights and concerns are heard and valued. Citizens participate in shaping the direction of their communities, while mercenaries simply follow orders. When people have meaningful input into how work gets done, when their expertise is sought and respected, when they can influence decisions that affect their daily experience, they develop ownership mindsets that transform their engagement. The military mind also understands the importance of shared hardship and shared celebration in building strong organizational cultures. When people work together to overcome difficult challenges, when they support each other through demanding periods, When they celebrate collective achievements, they develop bonds that extend beyond formal reporting relationships. This doesn't mean artificially creating crises, but it does mean acknowledging that meaningful work involves genuine challenges that require people to stretch beyond their comfort zones. Organizations that try to make everything easy and comfortable often fail to develop the resilience and commitment that emerge from successfully navigating difficulty together. The citizen's sword also reminds us that sustainable organizational effectiveness requires developing internal capabilities rather than constantly relying on external resources. Organizations that outsource too many critical functions, that depend too heavily on contractors and consultants, that fail to develop their own people's capabilities, often find themselves vulnerable when external resources become unavailable or unreliable. Building internal capability means investing in your people's development, even when that investment doesn't provide immediate returns. It means creating pathways for advancement that encourage people to build long-term relationships with the organization rather than viewing their current roles as temporary stepping stones to opportunities elsewhere. The most powerful realization from the military mind is that people's discretionary effort, the energy and creativity they choose to invest beyond the minimum required, often determines the difference between mediocre and exceptional organizational performance. This discretionary effort cannot be mandated or purchased. It can only be inspired through creating conditions where such investment feels meaningful and worthwhile. When you master the art of creating citizen mindsets rather than mercenary relationships, when you build environments where individual excellence serves collective purposes, when you develop internal capabilities that make your organization stronger and more resilient, you create competitive advantages that are difficult for others to replicate. Organizations led by people who understand these principles consistently outperform those that rely primarily on external resources and transactional relationships. They develop cultures of initiative and ownership that adapt more quickly to changing circumstances, solve problems more creatively, and maintain higher performance even during difficult periods. This understanding transforms how you approach leadership and organizational development, shifting focus from managing compliance to inspiring commitment, from controlling behavior to unleashing potential, from buying capability to building capability. The citizen's sword reminds us that the strongest organizations are those where people choose to fight for shared success rather than simply completing assigned tasks. Perhaps no concept from my political philosophy has been more misunderstood than my distinction between virtue and virtue, between effectiveness and goodness, between practical wisdom and moral idealism. The compass of practical wisdom became my symbol for this crucial insight. True leadership requires the ability to navigate toward effective action rather than simply following abstract moral principles, especially when those principles conflict with achieving genuinely beneficial outcomes. I developed this understanding through watching countless well-intentioned leaders fail to accomplish good things because they refuse to engage with the messy realities of human nature and organizational dynamics. These leaders possessed admirable moral qualities: honesty, kindness, generosity, fairness, but they lacked the practical skills needed to translate their good intentions into effective action in complex political environments. The tragedy wasn't that these leaders had poor values or selfish motivations. The tragedy was that their rigid adherence to idealized behavioral standards prevented them from achieving the very outcomes their values were supposed to serve. Their unwillingness to compromise, to engage in strategic thinking, to acknowledge the less noble aspects of human motivation often resulted in worse outcomes for the people they claimed to serve. Virtue, in my understanding, represents the practical wisdom needed to achieve worthwhile objectives in the real world of competing interests, limited resources, and imperfect people. It includes traditional virtues when they serve beneficial purposes, but it also includes qualities that pure moralists might find uncomfortable: strategic thinking, calculated timing, pragmatic compromise, and the willingness to use different approaches with different people based on what actually motivates them. This doesn't mean abandoning ethical considerations or embracing pure expediency. It means understanding that ethics must be practical to be meaningful, and that achieving genuinely good outcomes often requires methods that don't conform to abstract ideals about how things should work. The compass of practical wisdom points toward what actually works to create beneficial results rather than what feels morally pure to contemplate. Sometimes these directions align perfectly. Honesty builds trust that enables cooperation. Fairness creates commitment that sustains effort. Kindness generates loyalty that multiplies your influence. But sometimes they diverge, and practical wisdom requires choosing effectiveness over ideological purity. In modern organizational contexts, this translates into several specific insights. First, different people respond to different types of motivation, and effective leaders adapt their approach based on what actually influences each person rather than using the same approach with everyone. Some people are motivated by recognition and praise, others by challenge and achievement, still others by security and clear expectations. Using uniform approaches based on your own preferences or theoretical principles often produces suboptimal results. Second, timing and context matter enormously in determining what approaches will be effective. The same message delivered at different times or in different ways can produce completely different results. The same leadership style that works well in crisis situations may be counterproductive during periods of stability. Practical wisdom means adapting your methods to circumstances rather than rigidly applying consistent approaches, regardless of context. Third, sustainable results often require building broad coalitions of support, which means finding ways to align your objectives with the diverse interests of various stakeholders. This may require framing your initiatives differently for different audiences, emphasizing different benefits, or accepting modifications to your original vision in order to gain the support necessary for implementation. Pure idealists often resist such adaptations as compromises that dilute their vision. But practical wisdom recognizes that imperfect implementation that actually happens is usually more beneficial than perfect plans that never get executed because they couldn't build sufficient support. The distinction between virtue and virtue also applies to how you handle opposition and resistance. Traditional virtue might suggest always being diplomatic, avoiding conflict, and treating everyone with identical courtesy regardless of their behavior. Practical wisdom recognizes that different situations require different responses, and that sometimes clear consequences for poor behavior serve everyone's interests better than endless patience and accommodation. This doesn't mean being harsh or vindictive, but it does mean being willing to set and enforce boundaries when necessary. People who consistently create problems, who undermine team effectiveness, who violate commitments or treat others poorly, often need different approaches than those who are struggling due to lack of skill or unclear expectations. The compass of practical wisdom helps you navigate these situations by focusing on outcomes rather than processes. What approaches actually improve behavior and team effectiveness? What responses genuinely serve the interests of the organization and the people within it? Sometimes this points toward patience and support, sometimes toward clear feedback and consequences, sometimes toward creative solutions that address underlying causes of problems. Perhaps most importantly, virtue includes the willingness to take responsibility for difficult decisions and their consequences. Pure virtue often seeks to maintain moral purity by avoiding situations that require uncomfortable choices. Practical wisdom accepts that leadership sometimes means making decisions where all available options have negative aspects, and that Avoiding such decisions is itself a choice with consequences. This responsibility extends to being honest about trade-offs rather than pretending that all good things can be achieved simultaneously without cost. Practical wisdom means acknowledging that pursuing some objectives may require sacrificing others, that serving some stakeholders' interests may disappoint others, that achieving beneficial outcomes may require methods that feel uncomfortable. To those accustomed to simpler moral frameworks, the ultimate test of virtue versus virtue is effectiveness in achieving worthwhile outcomes that genuinely benefit the people and purposes you're committed to serving. When your approaches consistently produce beneficial results, when the people affected by your decisions are actually better off because of them, when your methods enable achievement of objectives that serve legitimate interests, then you're operating with practical wisdom, regardless of whether your specific tactics conform to abstract ideals. This perspective transforms how you approach leadership challenges and ethical dilemmas. Instead of asking only whether a particular approach feels morally pure, you also ask whether it's likely to produce beneficial outcomes. Instead of applying uniform principles regardless of context, you develop judgment about when different approaches are appropriate. Instead of avoiding difficult decisions, you engage with them thoughtfully and take responsibility for their consequences. The compass of practical wisdom doesn't eliminate the importance of ethical considerations. It integrates them with realistic understanding of how to achieve beneficial outcomes in complex human systems where perfect solutions rarely exist, and practical effectiveness often serves moral purposes better than moral purity. The greatest mistake most people make in understanding power is treating it as something mysterious or innate, rather than something that can be studied, understood, and skillfully applied. The scholar's lamp became my symbol for this insight. Power operates according to recognizable patterns and principles that become visible to those who observe human behavior systematically, rather than relying on assumptions, wishful thinking, or popular misconceptions. My approach to understanding power was fundamentally empirical. I observed what actually worked rather than what people claimed should work. I studied successful leaders to identify common patterns in their behavior. I analyzed failed initiatives to understand what went wrong. I compared different approaches to similar challenges to determine which strategies proved most effective under various circumstances. This systematic study revealed that power isn't magical or mysterious. It's simply the ability to influence outcomes through understanding and working with human nature and organizational dynamics. Like any other skill, it can be developed through careful observation, thoughtful practice, and continuous learning from both successes and failures. Most people never develop political intelligence because they approach power relationships emotionally rather than analytically. They focus on how they wish people would behave rather than studying how people actually behave. They interpret events through their personal feelings rather than looking for objective patterns that could inform more. Effective strategies. Developing political intelligence begins with separating your observations from your judgments. When someone opposes your proposal, don't immediately assume they're being unreasonable or hostile. Instead, try to understand their actual motivations, constraints, and interests. What would make supporting your proposal beneficial for them? What concerns might they have that haven't been addressed? What alternative approaches might better serve both your objectives and theirs? This analytical approach extends to studying successful people in your organization and industry. What specific behaviors contribute to their effectiveness? How do they build relationships, communicate ideas, handle conflicts, and position themselves for opportunities? Rather than dismissing their success as luck or politics, examine their methods for lessons you can adapt to your own situation. The scholar's lamp illuminates patterns that are invisible to casual observation. For example, I noticed that successful leaders consistently invest time in understanding the perspectives and motivations of people they need to work with, even when those people initially seem unimportant to their immediate objectives. This relationship building often pays dividends months or years later when those same people become relevant to new challenges or opportunities. I also observed that effective people pay careful attention to timing and context when introducing ideas or requesting support. They don't just have good proposals, they present those proposals at moments when decision makers are most likely to be receptive, when organizational priorities align with their suggestions, when resources are available for implementation. Another pattern involves how successful people handle setbacks and failures. Rather than becoming defensive or giving up, they treat problems as information that can improve their future approaches. They analyze what went wrong, adjust their strategies, and maintain their long-term focus despite short-term disappointments. The study of power also reveals the importance of developing multiple sources of influence rather than depending on any single approach. Some people build influence through expertise and competence, others through relationship building and collaboration, still others through strategic thinking and problem-solving ability. The most successful combine several of these approaches, creating multiple pathways to achieving their objectives. Understanding these patterns allows you to be more intentional about developing your own influence. Instead of hoping that good work will automatically be recognized and rewarded, you can systematically build the relationships, skills, and reputation that make recognition more likely. Instead of reacting emotionally to political dynamics, you can respond strategically in ways that advance your legitimate interests. This doesn't mean becoming calculating or manipulative. It means becoming more skillful at working with human nature and organizational realities to achieve worthwhile objectives. When you understand how decisions actually get made, how relationships actually function, how change actually happens, you become more effective at contributing to positive outcomes. The scholar's lamp also illuminates the importance of continuous learning and adaptation. Power dynamics change as organizations evolve, as new technologies emerge, as generational preferences shift, as economic conditions fluctuate. What worked in previous eras may be less effective today, and what works today may become obsolete tomorrow. This means staying curious about new developments in your field, new approaches to leadership and collaboration, new tools and methods that might enhance your effectiveness. It means regularly reassessing your strategies based on their actual results rather than assuming that past successes guarantee future effectiveness. The study of power is ultimately the study of human nature and social dynamics. The more deeply you understand what motivates people, how groups function, what creates trust and cooperation, what generates resistance and conflict, the more effectively you can navigate complex situations and build coalitions around shared objectives. This understanding transforms how you approach professional challenges and opportunities. Instead of relying on intuition or hoping for the best, you can make informed decisions based on realistic assessments of what approaches are most likely to succeed in your specific circumstances. The scholar's lamp reminds us that power isn't about dominating others or manipulating situations for selfish purposes. It's about understanding how to work effectively with others to achieve beneficial outcomes in complex human systems. When you master this understanding, you become someone others seek out for collaboration and leadership because they know you can navigate challenges skillfully and help achieve objectives that matter to everyone involved. This capability makes you more valuable to your organization and creates opportunities for advancement that might not otherwise exist. Leaders who combine good intentions with political intelligence are rare and highly prized because they can translate vision into reality, build support for necessary changes, and achieve results that benefit everyone involved. The systematic study of power, approached with curiosity and commitment to beneficial outcomes, becomes one of your most important professional development activities and one of your most reliable sources of increasing influence and effectiveness throughout your career. The corporate crown represents how ancient principles of power and influence manifest in today's business world, where the same fundamental dynamics that shaped Renaissance politics now determine success in modern organizations. While the context has changed dramatically, human nature remains constant, and the lessons I learned in 16th century Italy apply directly to 21st century corporate hierarchies, startup cultures, and digital workplaces. The most striking parallel between Renaissance courts and modern corporations is how informal networks of influence often matter more than formal organizational charts. Just as I observed courtiers wielding more real power than titled nobles, today's most influential employees are often those who understand relationship dynamics rather than those with the most impressive job titles. In my era, success required understanding the complex web of family connections, financial obligations, and political alliances that actually determined policy. Today's equivalent involves understanding the informal communication networks, cross-functional collaborations, and personal relationships that actually drive organizational decisions. The tools have evolved from handwritten letters to email, threads, and Slack channels, but the underlying dynamics remain identical. The Medici principle of strategic patronage translates perfectly to modern career development. Instead of commissioning art and funding scholarships, today's effective professionals invest in their colleagues' success through mentoring, collaboration, and strategic introductions. They help others achieve their goals, knowing that such investments create networks of mutual obligation and genuine goodwill that serve everyone's long-term interests. Modern technology amplifies these ancient dynamics rather than replacing them. Social media platforms become new venues for reputation management and relationship building. Video conferencing enables the kind of face-to-face relationship building that was once limited by geography. Project management tools create new opportunities to demonstrate competence and reliability across organizational boundaries. But technology also creates new challenges that require adapting classical principles to contemporary realities. The speed of modern communication means that reputation can be damaged or enhanced much more quickly than in previous eras. The permanence of digital records means that strategic communications require more careful consideration of long-term implications. The global nature of modern organizations means building influence across cultural boundaries that didn't exist in Renaissance. City-states, the lion and fox dynamic is particularly relevant in modern workplace contexts. Technical roles often reward lion-like qualities: direct problem-solving, clear communication, reliable execution. But advancement to leadership positions typically requires developing fox-like capabilities: strategic thinking, political awareness, the ability to navigate competing interests and build consensus around complex decisions. Many technically excellent professionals plateau in their careers because they excel at the lion aspects of their roles but never develop the fox skills needed for broader organizational influence. They solve problems brilliantly but struggle to build support for their solutions. They communicate clearly about technical issues but have difficulty translating their insights into terms that resonate with non-technical stakeholders. The art of appearing has become more complex in an era of constant visibility through digital communications and social media. Every email, every presentation, every video call contributes to your professional reputation. The theater curtain is always up, which means that managing your professional image requires constant attention to how you communicate, what you share, and how you present yourself across multiple channels. This creates opportunities for those who understand that personal branding isn't about self-promotion. It's about ensuring that your actual capabilities and contributions are visible to the people who make decisions about your career progression. The most effective professionals are intentional about sharing their work, highlighting their achievements, and positioning themselves as go-to resources for their areas of expertise. The necessity of conflict principle applies directly to modern team dynamics and organizational change management. The most effective teams I observe are those that handle disagreement constructively rather than avoiding it. They create environments where people feel safe expressing different perspectives, where conflicts focus on issues rather than personalities, and where diverse viewpoints improve decision-making rather than creating paralysis. Modern innovation challenges mirror the difficulties I observed with introducing new governmental systems in Italian cities. Organizations that successfully implement new technologies, processes, or strategic directions understand that change management is fundamentally about human psychology rather than technical capabilities. The bridge between worlds must help people transition from familiar methods to new approaches in ways that feel manageable and worthwhile. The citizen versus mercenary distinction has become even more relevant in an era of frequent job changes and gig economy work. Organizations that build cultures where people feel genuine ownership in collective success consistently outperform those that rely primarily on transactional relationships. The most successful professionals are those who bring citizen mindsets even to roles they don't plan to keep permanently, understanding that excellence in any position builds reputation and relationships that serve long-term career objectives. Fortunes. Wheel spins faster in today's rapidly changing business environment. Industries transform more quickly, technologies become obsolete more rapidly, and career paths require more frequent adaptation than ever before. This makes environmental awareness and strategic flexibility even more crucial for sustained success. The most effective modern professionals are those who combine deep expertise in their chosen fields with broad awareness of trends and developments that might affect their industries. They build diverse skill sets, maintain networks across different sectors, and position themselves to benefit from change rather than become its victims. The compass of practical wisdom guides modern leaders through ethical dilemmas that didn't exist in my era, but require the same fundamental approach, focusing on beneficial outcomes rather than rigid adherence to abstract principles. Issues like work-life balance, diversity and inclusion, environmental responsibility, and technological ethics require nuanced thinking that considers multiple perspectives and practical constraints. The corporate crown reminds us that while the specific contexts of power have evolved dramatically, the fundamental principles remain constant. Success still requires understanding human nature, building genuine relationships, adapting to changing circumstances, and developing the practical wisdom needed to translate good intentions into effective action. Those who master these ancient principles in modern contexts become the leaders their organizations turn to for their most challenging problems and their most ambitious opportunities. They understand that true power isn't about dominating others, but about creating value that benefits everyone involved, using timeless insights about human nature to build success in contemporary environments. Now comes the moment when abstract principles must become personal strategy. The individual's banner represents your unique path to influence and recognition, crafted from honest assessment of your current position, clear identification of advancement opportunities, and systematic building of the influence network that will carry you toward your objectives. This is where philosophy becomes practice, where observation becomes action, where studying power transforms into wielding power effectively and ethically. Your personal revolution begins with brutal honesty about where you currently stand in your organization's power structure. Most people either overestimate their influence, assuming their competence automatically translates into recognition, or underestimate their potential, believing that advancement requires qualities they don't possess. Both perspectives prevent effective strategic planning. Conduct a realistic audit of your current position. What decisions can you influence directly? Whose opinions carry weight when your performance is evaluated? What projects and initiatives would benefit significantly from your involvement? Which organizational challenges align with your skills and interests? Understanding your actual current influence provides the foundation for expanding it systematically. Next, map the informal power networks within your organization. Who are the people whose opinions shape important decisions? What are the communication channels through which crucial information flows? Which relationships enable access to resources, opportunities, and decision-makers? This mapping reveals the pathways through which influence actually moves, regardless of what the formal organizational chart suggests. Identify the gaps between your current network and the network you need to achieve your objectives. If you want to lead larger projects, you need relationships with people who allocate resources and approve initiatives. If you want to advance to senior leadership, you need visibility with executives who make promotion decisions. If you want to drive innovation, you need connections with people who champion new approaches and fund experimental projects. Building these relationships requires the strategic patience I learned through years of diplomatic work. You cannot simply approach influential people and request their support. You must first provide value that makes supporting you beneficial for them. This means understanding their challenges, priorities, and objectives well enough to offer genuine assistance that serves their interests while advancing your own. The most effective approach is identifying ways your skills and knowledge can help solve problems that matter to the people who support you need. When you can relieve burdens, provide insights, or contribute capabilities that make others more successful, you create the foundation for mutually beneficial relationships that extend beyond immediate transactions. Your personal revolution also requires developing what I call strategic visibility. Excellent work that remains invisible cannot contribute to your advancement. You must create appropriate opportunities for your contributions to be seen and understood by people who influence decisions about your career progression. This doesn't mean shameless self-promotion or taking credit for others' work. It means ensuring that when you solve important problems, when you contribute valuable insights, when you help others achieve their objectives, these contributions are appropriately documented and communicated to relevant stakeholders. Strategic visibility includes participating in high-profile projects that demonstrate your capabilities to broader audiences. It means volunteering for cross-functional initiatives that expand your network and showcase your skills to different parts of the organization. It means sharing your expertise through presentations, written communications, and collaborative problem-solving that positions you as a valuable resource. Timing becomes crucial in implementing your personal revolution. Just as I learned that political initiatives succeed or fail based on environmental conditions, your career advancement strategies must align with organizational cycles, leadership, changes, and strategic priorities that create opportunities for recognition and advancement. Study your organization's rhythms and cycles. When are budgets allocated? When are strategic plans developed? When are personnel decisions made? When are new initiatives launched? Positioning your contributions and requests to coincide with these organizational moments increases the likelihood that your efforts will receive appropriate attention and support. Your personal revolution must also include developing capabilities that extend beyond your current role. The people who advance most rapidly are those who demonstrate potential for broader responsibilities before those responsibilities are formally assigned. This means building skills, knowledge, and relationships that prepare you for the positions you want, rather than just excelling in your current position. This forward-thinking approach requires understanding where your industry and organization are heading, what capabilities will become more valuable, what challenges will need to be addressed, what opportunities will emerge from changing conditions. Investing in developing relevant capabilities before they become obviously necessary positions you as someone ready for advancement when opportunities arise. The individual's banner also represents the importance of maintaining your authentic identity while developing political skills. The most sustainable influence comes from being genuinely yourself while becoming more skillful at working with others to achieve shared objectives. This isn't about changing who you are. It's about expressing who you are more effectively in organizational contexts. Your personal revolution succeeds when you combine clear understanding of organizational realities with authentic expression of your unique capabilities and values. When you can navigate political dynamics skillfully while maintaining your integrity, when you can build influence through providing genuine value rather than through manipulation, when you can advance your legitimate interests while serving broader organizational purposes, you've mastered the art of personal power that serves both individual and collective success. This revolution isn't a single dramatic transformation, but a series of strategic choices and incremental improvements that compound over time. Each relationship you build thoughtfully, each contribution you make strategically, each capability you develop purposefully adds to your influence and creates new opportunities for meaningful advancement. The individual's banner flies highest when it represents not just personal ambition, but commitment to creating value that benefits everyone involved in your success. When your advancement serves legitimate organizational needs, when your influence contributes to collective achievement, when your success creates opportunities for others, you've achieved the kind of sustainable power that can withstand changing circumstances and create lasting impact. The weight of responsibility reminds us that power, once gained, comes with inevitable costs that must be understood and accepted before you begin your ascent. Every increase in influence brings new obligations, new pressures, and new dilemmas that test both your capabilities and your character. Those who pursue power without understanding its burdens often find themselves unprepared for the realities of leadership and influence. I learned this lesson through my own painful experience and through observing leaders who achieved the positions. They sought only to discover that success created challenges they hadn't anticipated. Power brings visibility that can become scrutiny. It brings responsibility that can become isolation. It brings the need to make decisions that affect others in ways that can weigh heavily on your conscience. The first price of power is the loss of simple relationships. As your influence grows, others begin relating to you differently. Some become deferential when they previously treated you as an equal. Others become calculating, viewing their interactions with you through the lens of what they might gain or lose. Still others become distant, assuming that your advancement has changed who you are fundamentally. This transformation in relationships is often subtle but profound. Conversations become more guarded as people consider how their words might be interpreted or used. Spontaneous interactions decrease as others become more conscious of the power dynamics involved. The casual friendships that sustain us through difficult periods can become strained when power imbalances shift the foundation of those relationships. Managing this challenge requires intentional effort to maintain authentic connections with people who knew you before your advancement and who can relate to you as a person rather than as a position. It also means being conscious of how your new influence affects others and working to minimize the distance that power can create between you and the people whose support and friendship you value. The second price of power is increased accountability and scrutiny. Your decisions and actions carry more weight because they affect more people and because they're visible to broader audiences. Mistakes that would have been private learning opportunities in lower-level positions become public failures that can damage not only your reputation, but also the people and projects you're responsible for leading. This heightened accountability extends to your personal behavior as well as your professional decisions. Leaders are held to higher standards, and actions that might be overlooked in others can become significant issues when they're attributed to someone in a position of influence. The freedom to make mistakes without consequence diminishes as your power increases. The third price of power is the burden of difficult decisions. As your influence grows, you'll increasingly face situations where all available options have negative consequences for someone. You'll need to allocate limited resources among competing priorities, knowing that your choices will disappoint people whose needs are legitimate. You'll need to make personnel decisions that affect people's livelihoods and career prospects. You'll need to balance short-term pressures against long-term objectives when the two conflict. These decisions often require choosing between competing values and interests, all of which may be important and worthy of consideration. The weight of responsibility means accepting that leadership sometimes requires making choices that you know will cause problems for others, even when those choices serve broader organizational interests. The fourth price of power is the constant pressure to maintain and justify your position. Power is never permanent or automatic. It must be continuously earned through performance, relationship management, and adaptation to changing circumstances. This creates ongoing stress about meeting expectations, defending decisions, and proving that your influence is being used effectively. This pressure can be particularly intense during difficult periods when results are disappointing, when conflicts arise, or when organizational changes threaten your position. The higher you rise, the further you can fall. And the awareness of this vulnerability can create anxiety that affects both your decision-making and your personal well-being. The fifth price of power is the loneliness that often accompanies leadership positions. The combination of increased responsibility, changed relationships, and difficult decisions can create isolation even when you're surrounded by people. The burden of leadership can be difficult to share because others may not understand the complexity of your situation or may have their own interests that conflict with providing objective support. This loneliness is compounded by the fact that power often requires confidentiality about sensitive information, strategic considerations, and personnel matters that you cannot discuss with others. The weight of carrying important decisions alone, without the benefit of open consultation with trusted advisors, can be emotionally exhausting. Understanding these costs doesn't mean avoiding the pursuit of influence. It means preparing for them so that you can handle them effectively while maintaining your integrity and well-being. The most successful leaders are those who accept power's burdens as part of their responsibility rather than unexpected impositions. This preparation includes developing support systems that can sustain you through difficult periods. It means building relationships with mentors and peers who understand the challenges of leadership and can provide perspective and advice. It means maintaining connections with your core values and purposes so that the weight of responsibility doesn't compromise your sense of who you are and why your work matters. The weight of responsibility also requires developing emotional resilience and decision-making frameworks that can guide you through complex situations. This means learning to live with ambiguity, to make decisions with incomplete information, and to accept that some problems don't have perfect solutions. Most importantly, understanding the price of power helps you maintain perspective about what you're seeking and why. When you pursue influence for purposes larger than your own advancement, when you see power as a tool for creating value rather than an end in itself, when you accept its burdens as willingly as you embrace its benefits, you're more likely to use your influence wisely and sustainably. The weight of responsibility reminds us that true power comes not from avoiding difficult choices, but from making them thoughtfully and accepting their consequences with integrity. When you understand and accept these costs, you can pursue influence with realistic expectations and appropriate preparation for the challenges that success will bring. The eternal flame represents the ultimate achievement of power, creating influence that outlasts your individual presence and continues to shape outcomes long after you've moved on to other roles or responsibilities. This is the highest form of success, building systems, developing people, and establishing principles that sustain beneficial impact independent of your continued involvement. As I reflect on my own legacy, I understand that my writings have influenced leaders for over 5 centuries, not because they promoted my personal advancement, but because they captured timeless insights about human nature and organizational dynamics that remain relevant across different eras and contexts. The principles I identified continue to serve others, because they were based on careful observation of lasting realities, rather than temporary circumstances. Your legacy begins with understanding that the most sustainable power comes from empowering others rather than concentrating authority in yourself. When you develop people's capabilities, when you create systems that function effectively without your constant supervision, when you establish cultures that perpetuate beneficial practices, you build influence that extends far beyond what you could accomplish through personal effort alone. This means shifting your focus from being indispensable to making others capable. The leaders who create lasting impact are those who build strong teams, develop successors, and create institutional knowledge that survives personnel changes. They understand that their ultimate value lies not in being irreplaceable, but in building capabilities that make their organizations stronger and more resilient. The eternal flame of legacy burns brightest when it illuminates principles and practices that others can adapt to their own circumstances. This requires distilling your insights and methods into forms that can be communicated, understood, and applied by people in different situations. It means identifying the underlying patterns and frameworks that explain why certain approaches work rather than just documenting what worked in specific instances. Building lasting influence also requires creating systems and processes that embody your values and insights. When you establish procedures that consistently produce beneficial outcomes, when you design organizational structures that encourage desired behaviors, when you implement decision-making frameworks that guide others toward effective choices, you extend your influence far beyond your personal presence. The most powerful legacy systems are those that align individual success with collective benefit. When people achieve their personal objectives by contributing to larger purposes, when individual excellence serves organizational effectiveness, when personal advancement depends on developing others and building institutional capabilities, you've created sustainable influence that serves everyone involved. This alignment requires understanding that legacy isn't about ensuring that things continue to be done exactly as you would do them. It's about establishing foundations strong enough to support innovation and adaptation while maintaining core principles that create lasting value. The best legacies evolve and improve over time while preserving essential insights about what works and why. Your contribution to the world extends beyond your immediate organization to the broader professional community and society. When you share insights that help others navigate similar challenges, when you mentor people who go on to create their own positive impact, when you contribute to industry knowledge and best practices that benefit many organizations, you multiply the value of your experience and observations. This broader contribution often happens through writing, speaking, teaching, and consulting that distills your experience into forms that others can learn from and adapt. It happens through building networks of professionals who share knowledge and support each other's development. It happens through participating in industry organizations and professional communities that advance collective understanding and effectiveness. The eternal flame reminds us that lasting influence requires balancing confidence in your insights with humility about their limitations. The principles that work well in your circumstances may need adaptation for different situations, industries, or cultural context. The most useful legacies are those that provide frameworks for thinking rather than rigid prescriptions for action. This means presenting your insights as hypotheses to be tested rather than absolute truths to be followed blindly. It means encouraging others to adapt your methods based on their own observations and circumstances. It means remaining open to feedback and new information that might refine or improve your understanding. The measure of lasting influence isn't whether people continue to use your exact methods, but whether they achieve better outcomes by applying principles and insights you help them understand. When your frameworks help others think more clearly about complex challenges, when your examples inspire more effective leadership, when your systems enable sustainable success, you've created the kind of legacy that justifies the pursuit of power and influence. Final wisdom for the power conscious. Remember that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in creating value that serves everyone involved. The leaders who achieve lasting impact are those who use their influence to build rather than to tear down, to develop rather than to exploit, to create opportunities rather than to hoard advantages. Your eternal flame burns brightest when it lights the way for others to achieve their own success while contributing to purposes larger than individual advancement. When you master the art of power in service of genuine benefit, when you build influence that enables rather than constrains, when you create legacies that multiply value rather than concentrating it, you achieve the ultimate success that neither time nor circumstance can diminish. The art of power, properly understood and skillfully applied, becomes a force for creating the kind of world we all want to live in, one where capability is recognized, where contribution is rewarded, where excellence is encouraged, and where individual success serves collective flourishing. This is the highest achievement of political wisdom, using your understanding of how power works to ensure that it works for everyone's benefit. Go forward with this knowledge, and may your influence create ripples of positive change that extend far beyond what you can imagine or control. The world needs leaders who understand both the realities of power and the responsibilities it entails. Be one of them.